All right, so my talk today is about the minimum viable CTO. My name is Ian. I'm the co-founder of Later. We were famously made at a hackathon and have been growing ever since. In between all the selling and market validation and use of coffee meetings, someone might actually expect you to make something. So we're going to be talking about what that is if you are a tech startup, a few over things that you'll need to know about creating the technology, and what are the base level of things you'd have to do as an early stage CTO. Right off the bat, we're going to get to the religious one, which is your tech stack. Now, this one actually matters quite a bit in terms of your culture. The key thing is, as a CTO, you're going to need to pick what your stack is, and more importantly, stay with it. I say that's important because in the early stages of Latergram, back when we were called Latergram before Later, we were kind of part-time, and everyone was working on different parts, and we had this weird Frankenstein of a project, which was some Rails, some Backbone.js, some Ember, and this actually slowed us down quite a bit. So whatever stack you pick, you need to be consistent with it. Now, how do you pick one? Again, this is where the religious thing comes wrong. So I'm just going to tell you all my 2016 religious beliefs. PHP is for old people who still use the phrase Web 2.0. Python for web backend is old and busted, but for machine learning, it's the new hotness. Everyone on Java is looking for an exit strategy from it. Oracle suing Google will do that for it. Using .NET says, I'm exploiting or I'm getting exploited by, and Microsoft sales guy. React.js is a great front-end framework for people who do whatever Hacker News tells them. Ember.js is a great front-end framework for people who do the opposite of whatever Hacker News tells them. And Haskell and Go are solutions for problems your startup will not have. So if you want to fight me about those, I will be outside after this talk. But again, the key thing is, I think one got cut off there, which was that anyone who's making fun of you for using Rails or Node.js probably went solo to prom. So there's nothing wrong with either of those. The next one is the big thing, is managing your dev process. Software is kind of like sludge. You got to make sure it's flowing out all the time. We use a pretty standard thing at Later, which is that we have 2-week sprints. In that, at the beginning of 2 weeks, we decide what we're going to get done in the 2 weeks. Now, that's kind of good for having some sense of like how much you can get done in 2 weeks for planning, but it's also really important at early stage startups because what happens is, inevitably, the biz dev guy is going to be like, oh man, we can be the greatest thing ever if you do this right now. And if you're doing that all the time, you're just flailing around. It's kind of nice to have the development team focused on a certain set of products or things to do for 2 weeks. Use an issue tracker. Not a spreadsheet. There's like one built into GitHub. Just track your bugs, otherwise you're going to forget them. If you verbally tell a developer a bug, they will forget it. I do it all the time, intentionally. So basically, if you're not willing to commit to filing a bug, I know it's probably not that important. Use GitHub. Use a central repository for your code. We won't talk about pull requests. It's a little too nerdy, but testing saves time. I know everyone's like, oh, we got to go faster with testing. But if you want to use continuous integration, which is deploying your software all the time, you're going to need a good test suite. So if a developer is telling you, I want to spend some time on tests, let them. It will slow down your features, but it's one of those kind of investments that you have to make. Key thing, how we do it at Later is that anytime we push to the master branch, it's automatically deployed to our staging server, so our product management people can play with it before we kick it out to production. At some places, they go pretty hardcore and deploy to production right after that, but that's a little rich for my blood. Deployments. One button. Your job as a CTO is to make sure that one command can take your software and put it live on the internet. We were able to do this at the hackathon we were founded at, so you should be able to do it if you have plenty of time. Now, you might be thinking, well, I've got a mobile app and something. Great thing called Buddy Build, local team, go do it. They will do one-click deploys for for mobile stuff as well. I worked at startups where like deployments took 20 minutes, and what it meant is that we didn't want to put it out all the time. Like you want to be like a very minimum delta between what's in your master branch and what's on production. It's also pretty motivating for developers to know that any code they write will be out in production within about 24 hours. Backups. I think everyone knows backups are important because we've all lost some data somewhere and we all get it. But I learned the hard way how bad this can be. These are two commands that look very similar. Bundle exec rake db schema load and Heroku run rake db schema load. Anyone know the difference between these two? This one removes my local database. This one destroys the production database. I did that one. And I mean, not like we just launched and there's no use. I mean, like we had raised $1 million in funding, Fortune 500 users. Labor Day last year, I ran that one and I destroyed. Later didn't exist for about an hour. And I kind of knew we had backups, but importantly, I didn't really know how to return from one. It's great that you have a backup, but you also need to know how to come back from it. Otherwise, it's kind of useless. So my frantic, honestly, I thought we were done as a company. I thought I'd have to get a sword and fall on it because that was the only way to reclaim my honor. But fortunately, we used Heroku, and the guy sent me a message back, and with my frantic all caps misspelled one, he's like, "Hey man, calm down. We've all been there. You got the plan," and he showed me how to do it, and we only lost about 2 minutes of data, thankfully. But I really can't stress that is and how bad that is or how important backups are. Not because necessarily your machines will fail, but you'll pull one of these on Labor Day. Monitoring is also very important. Specifically, you want to know if your site is up. Simple thing, if your site was down for whatever reason, would you know? How are errors being recorded and sent back to you? We use Raygun. This is also very important with mobile apps. If it's crashing, would you know? You can't make quality software unless you know what errors are happening out in the real world. And also, how is performance being monitored? This is different than something you'd use like Mixpanel for tracking events to make sure you're growing up and to the right and all that good stuff. I mean, which functions are running slow? And what level of agony are your users having if they're loading things right off the bat? As developers, we're really bad for running things on our local machine and being like, oh, it runs fine. It had to go all the way from one part of my hard disk to another. And that's just not the real world. Sometimes you're in a massive database and it takes a while to load. So that's it. Just a little note, Later is actually hiring too. I'm mostly concerned about devs because that's my thing, but I think we're hiring some muggles as well if you want to check out our website at later.com/jobs. But I'm happy to take any questions. No one? Yes.
What are you using for performance monitoring?
Right now we use New Relic just because it comes fair with Heroku, but there's actually a new one that we really like called Skylight. It's based out of Portland, and they don't measure response times. They actually measure agony, which is and they just put little faces and it just look, and or exclamation marks. And it's really good for knowing that just because something takes up a lot of time doesn't mean it's bad, because if no one's really hitting it, who cares? But it really measures also how much agony you're waiting for, which is really what people ultimately care about. No one else? Oh, yay. Hey, how's it going, Checky? I'm good.
How do you organize your dev team in regards to top to bottom levels of people overseeing each other, all that stuff?
Okay, so Shecky's question was about kind of hierarchy. The nice thing about early stage startups is that you can have a very flat structure. As a CTO, I didn't actually talk about recruiting because even though that is kind of a huge aspect of things, but conceivably you should be as flat as possible. I just have a few direct reports and we do a one-on-one once a week, and that's kind of where we look at anything that's kind of blocking them. We also do daily stand-ups, which are very important for developers because they give you an opportunity to say what you're working on yesterday, today, and if you're blocked on anything. And if you kind of notice the same dev working on the same thing a couple of days, you might want to be like, hey guy, what's up? Are you, because they might be doing that term called, we love it, called yak shaving, where oh, I've got to get this to work, and then do that after that, do that after that, and then before you know it, you're shaving a yak because you need a compiler to work. And somehow that makes a lot of sense. So you got to be careful about those kind of things, and stand-ups are a great way of preventing that.
There's quite a few founders out there that are not, don't have a technical background.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've met a lot of people who are looking, and what advice would you have for someone who's looking to find a CTO and has no clue what they're looking for?
As someone with technical skills, I've never actually had to encounter that. I've actually spent most of my time trying to avoid people looking for technical co-founders because they want to make Tinder for dogs or something. I know. Okay, so how I got conned into my first relationship like that was it was actually a technical it was like a founder speed dating event. And I was a little hesitant to go because you're just meeting a bunch of like MBAs or wannabe MBAs. And but the guy who actually, what I liked was he didn't actually attend the event. He just messaged everyone who attended it because he didn't want to be bothered like with a one-on-one interaction because it was a waste of time. But then he like messaged, and it was like Grow Lab was about to start, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to put an application in together?" And he actually had a background. He worked for, oh, I should really know that because it was impressive. Oh, right, he was like a consulting group, and he had an MBA, and it was a really impressive pedigree. And we got into Grow Lab, and that was just how it went. If you're looking for one, it's kind of hard because you're basically, it's a marriage. Like I spend more time with my co-founders than I do with my girlfriend. So it's, you know, and you know, she went through a much longer vetting phase than they did. Yeah. That's her dog. So anyway, but yeah, if you're trying to find someone, it's really, it's one of the hardest things you're going to do that's in front of you. It's actually not the hardest thing you will do. There are things way harder past that. But part of it is that if you have a compelling product, sometimes you will recruit people just on that, but you kind of have to have the product to show people to see how it's compelling. Make friends with nerds when you're young is the right answer. University is a great way to do that. But you're going to need a hard technical person, like if you're going to have technical problems, because the first technical person you have, you're probably not going to get anyone smarter than that, which is a hard thing to think about. But like realistically, if you're not a good dev, how are you going to know what another good dev looks like? So it's kind of hit or miss in terms of employee quality from there on down. So go to Lighthouse Labs, learn to code yourself, get some sense of what it's like, make a prototype. You're just gonna have to keep pushing forward without it because there's a lot of demand for developers. And if I had a nickel for every time someone wanted me to work for free on some app and we would split the profits, it's like I have, you know, people seem to think that developers don't have their own ideas, which I kind of find offensive. It's like, no, you're the developer guy. You're not allowed to have ideas. And it's like, yeah, I am, jackass.
So we have the other side of the question. You are the technical co-founder of the Pretty Girl Ball.
Yeah.
How
Thank you.
do you choose?
So Diltz is wondering how I find the non-technical person. I actually argue that's a lot harder because y'all try and sound like Steve Jobs. And it's hard to like actually differentiate a crazy person with an idea from a visionary. Like if I was pitching you Tinder in what did it come out, 2011, 2012? Hey, it's like a dating site and you just swipe and everyone's like, no, you got plenty of fish, you have OkCupid. I would never have joined that. Snapchat sounds like a fun hackathon app that I would have never actually, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know it'd be a multi-billion-dollar company. But sometimes like you get lucky and you have to pick it. I was looking for someone who can communicate and more importantly, sell. The biggest thing is if you have one person building the product, someone has to be out there selling it. And that can be with enterprise software directly. They've got to go do big sales, and hopefully they have some domain knowledge, which would be the best way. How a co-founder would get me pretty easily, if they said, hey, I've been working in refrigerators for 30 years, and there's this one little thing that no one does, and if we made software that do this, we could reduce the price of making refrigerators by 3%. I'd be on that. It'd be boring, but I know like the market refrigerators is huge. He has some inside knowledge. He knows something no one else does, and if he can sell to people, I know it's going to be successful. If I can write him whatever software would make a refrigerator production cost go down 3%. Anything else? Last one. Yeah. That's a great question about how we actually get the business team involved in the 2-week sprints. The 2 weeks is just an arbitrary thing. It doesn't really matter. It was just a number that worked for us. The only reason we didn't do, Stella. The only reason we didn't do 1 week was just the meeting